So back in late February, I had the great opportunity to attend a 1911 build class with John Shu of Blackmass Custom. John Shu is a several-time national champion, former Marine Corps machinist, member of the Marine Corps shooting team, and one of the premier custom 1911 builders with a distinct emphasis on making pistols for bullseye pistol shooting. He's also been one of my biggest mentors when it comes to the sport, so I jumped on the opportunity to learn something from him that I've been interested in pretty heavily for the past year or so, which is building a 1911. The class covered everything that goes into making a super accurate 1911, and I'm going to make a full video on it in the future. For now, I just want to take a quick overview of the 1911 that I built in the class, as well as my experiences with it so far. First thing, I want to address the elephant in the room. This pistol is not stainless steel, it is carbon steel, but it's currently in the white. The class mainly covers the mechanical aspects of the 1911, whereas blending, polishing, and finishing are to be done afterwards. And that's because by far the most time-consuming and labor-intensive parts of the process is blending and polishing and finishing. But after you've blended and polished it, you can always send the gun back to Blackmass Custom and John will apply the finish of your choice to it, whether that's bluing or PVD. He has all kinds of finishes he can do for you. So this pistol was built to comply with the CMP, or the Civilian Marksmanship Program, service pistol rules. Service pistol is a component of American bullseye pistol shooting that goes back to the military origins of the sport. The specificities of service pistol has changed over the years as we moved from revolvers to the 1911, for example, and from the 1911 to the Beretta, but the course of fire has remained basically unchanged since about World War II. I have a full video on it if you're interested, but as far as the modern day equipment requirements of the modern day service pistol matches go, the major points are that the pistol has to have iron sights, it has to be 9mm through 45 auto, it has to have standard grips, it has to have a 4-pound trigger. In years prior, the requirements were much more strict, allowing only 1911s and Berettas, and their outward appearances had to be very similar to issued US pistols. That would include things like it had to have a spur hammer and standard grip safety. No beaver tail grip safeties were allowed. But today you are allowed to shoot basically any model of duty sidearm that you want within those rules that I mentioned earlier. Now, if you're looking at this pistol and thinking, well, why does it have a standard grip safety and spur hammer if I'm allowed a beaver tail? And the reason is I'm kind of a traditionalist when it comes to 1911s. So when I signed up for the build class, I specifically asked for a standard beaver tail and spur hammer, and John Shu was able to accommodate me. As far as high-end multi-$1,000 1911s go, the beaver tail grip safety is essentially a given at this point. It's a standard feature. So really this deviates from the norm of what this pistol is and truly makes it custom, ironically, by going back to something that would have been considered standard. So anyways, let's go ahead and go through the build list, starting with the slide. The slide of this pistol was made by Caspian and has the standard Caspian slanted serrations. When it comes to serrations, there are basically only two types that I like, and those are the classic vertical government fine serrations and these slanted serrations that have a little bit wider spacing. The fine slanted serrations, in my opinion, don't really do it for me. These wider slanted serrations, on the other hand, are very similar to the government issue post-war national match slides, which were essentially some of the first custom 1911s going back to the late 50s and 60s. You also had, of course, the Colt Gold Cup national match, which had similar wide slanted serrations. You really wouldn't see fine slanted serrations until probably around the late 80s or 90s. And I think Springfield Armory Inc. were the ones to really popularize that. And the last thing I would want is for this pistol to be confused with a Springfield Armory Inc. 1911. I actually had a really tough time deciding between the standard vertical serrations and the slanted serrations, but in the end I kind of fought my traditionalist urge and went with something different, and I think it came out great. I think Caspian does a great job with their standard slanted serrations. Now, when we first got the slides, they had Caspian logos on it, but we surface ground those off so we could remark it. You can actually still see sort of the wavy tool marks created by the surface grinder. It almost looks like the striping you get in wood grain sometimes, so I think that's pretty cool. I'm not sure if I want to keep that or if I'm just going to sand these completely off. So on the right side of the slide, we have the Blackmass custom engravings and John Shu's logo. And on the left-hand side of the slide, I got a faux national match slide part number engraved on there. The original military national match slides would be, I believe, NM7791435, but I didn't want it to be the exact number because, of course, this isn't a national match slide. So instead we have 7791732, which is a number with some personal significance that maybe someone can figure out. And if you're familiar with the 1911 from Metal Gear Solid 3, you'll know it also has a faux national match number. So that's also pretty cool. Now onto the nuts and bolts of the upper. The barrel is naturally a Cart National Match 45 barrel with a Cart bushing that we fit super tight to the slide. Like, I have to seriously beat the bushing out of this thing every single time. In any case, Carts have been the gold standard for match 1911 barrels for ever at this point. Now, straying away from my traditionalist preferences, we actually have a full-length or one-piece guide rod in here. And honestly, guys, I'm a total freaking convert. It just makes taking a 1911 apart so much easier than the standard GI plunger spring assembly. But even on a standard 1911, I prefer to take them down like a high power by pulling the slide assembly off first and then taking the bushing out. So yeah, I just love how easy this makes it to take down this gun, especially when it's fit this tight. Now the rear sight on this is actually an original Bomar from before Bomar went out of business, which is pretty cool and retro. Nowadays, if you're looking for a Bomar sight, you're looking at essentially copies. Ken sight is probably the go-to. That's who I would have used if I didn't go with the original Bomars, but super cool to have an original Bomar on there. So one thing I did with this rear sight is I actually took a safe edge file and I opened up the rear sight notch. I find that necessary on pretty much every factory adjustable sight out there. They usually come with a pretty narrow rear sight notch. I think the assumption is that they know you're going to go in there and open it up to your liking anyways. I wish I could sit here and tell you I have some exact ratio of front sight width to rear sight notch width or whatever, but honestly, I just lay a file in there, take a few swipes, hold the pistol up and go, yeah, that's good. So I'll probably overlay some video or photo in here of showing my front and rear sight width. The front sight on this pistol is, of course, a Novak sight cut. That's pretty much standard on 1911s these days. And the sight itself started as a blank and was then cut down to size. I undercut the front face, so if you see there's actually kind of an angle facing me, and then I profiled the side so it kind of slopes away from me, and then I rounded the front off and kind of blended it to match the front of the slide. You know, I don't know how I feel about this. I think I would prefer a standard tenon sight as long as it was like silver soldered or even better spot welded into place with something like a micro TIG welder or a laser welder. I think it's just a much cleaner look than a Novak sight, but definitely not nearly as efficient or easy to do or easy to replace. And in the case of silver soldering, you actually end up drawing the temper of the slide a little bit because it takes about 1200 degrees Fahrenheit to melt that solder. Now, I might go in and try to blend this sight a little bit into the dovetail, but for now, I think I'll just let it be. And in case you were wondering, the front sight width is just a little bit over 1/8 of an inch, which is standard. You know, it always kind of makes me laugh when people talk about how wide front sights aren't precise. I remember I watched a presentation, a video here on YouTube a little while ago, where the guy was talking about how iron sights are imprecise. So I left a comment kind of poking holes in some of his arguments, and he replied by talking about how Glock front sights are 20 minutes of angle and can't be nearly as precise as a red dot simply because of how wide the front sight is. And that's something fairly common that I've heard at this point. People want narrow front sights. They think it'll be more precise or whatever, but narrow front sights are harder for your eye to see against the bullseye. They're harder for your eye to see in general, harder to focus on. And if you don't have a good relationship between the front sight width and the rear sight notch, that narrow front sight is just going to be swimming in the rear sight and you won't be able to see your sight alignment. The most important thing when it comes to iron sight shooting and being precise is sight alignment. Too much light in the rear sight and you can't see your sight alignment as precisely as you need to repeatedly make accurate hits at, for example, 50 yards like we do in the sport of bullseye. If you want to see an example of a wide front sight, take a look at my air pistol. 10-meter air pistol, the Olympic sport, is shot indoors, and I noticed that indoors I had trouble focusing on my front sight, and the front sight was getting lost in that super black bullseye that you get on the electronic targets. So I took a piece of zinc key stock and I made my own front sight with a file. The front sight is about 1/4 of an inch wide. And of course I adjusted my rear sight width to match and give me, 2 narrow bands of light that help me see my sight alignment. But again, not too much light and not too little. and I found it way easier to be accurate indoors now that the front sight extends past the sides of the bullseye and I can see my sight alignment. I mean, it's probably a 50-minute of angle front sight at this point, but I can see my sight alignment and I can see the top edge of the front sight bisecting the bullseye, and that's all you need to make accurate shots. And at this point in time, I do have a master classification in air pistols, so I'd say it's working pretty well. Your eye focuses on the front sight, but your brain needs to be totally conscious of how the sights are aligned and only just slightly aware of where the sights are on the target. It's kind of weird, but it's something that kind of clicks as you shoot more. Sights are one of the main ways that we interface with a gun, and that's why I'm spending a long time talking about it, and that's going to be the same with the trigger and the grips as well. These are the main ways we interact with a gun, so it's something I'm very particular about. Now, onto the frame. The frame has 25 LPI checkering on the front strap and was made by Deep River Custom in Ramsey, North Carolina. I actually ended up with serial number 7, which is cool. The frame was machined from billet, and both the frame and the slide are carbon steel, as mentioned earlier. The fire control group in this pistol is all cylinder and slide. They make fantastic ignition components. The hammer is actually pretty cool. So I originally wanted to go with a new old stock, original World War II style spur hammer, but John Shue did me one better and had this new old stock hammer that was made for the Marine Corps shooting team's service pistol team, back when they still had a service pistol team. So probably almost 10 years ago, when there was still the requirement for service pistols or hardball guns to have a spur hammer and a standard grip safety. So really the best of both worlds. I have a modern ignition system made by Cylinder and Slide, some of the best in the industry, but it has this cool old school look, and of course the sear and disconnector are also made by Cylinder and Slide. Now, I mentioned the grip safety. The grip safety on this is also a original part or a new old stock vintage part. This is an old Colt grip safety. I believe it's either World War II vintage or slightly after that. It's got the C mark and the box on the side of it, and as you can see, I've done a little bit of blending to this, not much though. I also had to reshape the back of the frame to look right with this grip safety, because this frame actually came from Deep River Custom with the radiuses for a beaver tail safety already in it. So a little work with a file and some sanding sticks, and I re-governmentized it, I guess. I also wanted an original style GI thumb safety, and I was able to get that. I'm pretty sure this is a World War II vintage part as well. I just like that it's small and out of the way. I mean, I shoot 1911s with a high thumb, but I find most paddle safeties force my thumb too high as to almost be uncomfortable, especially over a long period of time. And they're so big that once they start getting uncomfortable, you can't lay your thumb alongside them either. The original GI style safety like this is small, so that's out of the way. My thumb's actually resting pretty much on the grip and the plunger tube. So I think they got it right the first time with the GI thumb safety, and it's pretty stupid that these aren't more common, especially for like carry applications. They're small, they're out of the way, and I've never had a problem engaging or disengaging one. The slide stop pin, slide release, slide lock, whatever you want to call it, is from EGW, and it's totally standard looking, of course. We did do the cool profiling and little notch on the back that makes, you know, putting it in and out easier and avoiding the idiot scratch a little easier. Other than that, it's a standard slide stop pin. Main spring housing is flat and checkered, and I'm not sure who made it. Also, I forgot what weight my hammer spring is, so don't ask, but it's pretty light. At some point, I am going to drill this for a lanyard loop for reasons. Lanyard loops, of course, are just totally rad on service pistols, so I will put a lanyard loop in here. The trigger on this is a Harrison design medium trigger. I've filed on to better fit my finger length and trigger reach. I also kind of took off some of the squareness of it, kind of rounded it over, made it more comfortable. And I also drilled through the over travel screw on this, because for some reason the Harrison triggers come with the set screw drilled into a blind hole on the back side of the trigger, so you have to take the whole trigger out to adjust the over travel instead of just being able to adjust it from the outside. Now, I'm probably going to replace this with a World War I smooth-faced one-piece trigger. I don't like the look or feel of these aluminum triggers. I don't like how difficult aluminum is to work with in regards to finishing and refinishing. Aluminum also has this great feature that you'd know if you've ever carried an M16 in cold weather, but in the cold, this trigger absolutely sucks the heat out of your fingertip, which is something you start to notice when you're holding this thing up for 30 minutes at 50 yards during slow fire. Aluminum is in fact an excellent heat sink, especially when compared to steel or plastic. So yes, that is a discovery I have found with this trigger. And yes, I think I would even prefer plastic over an aluminum trigger shoe at this point. Now, last but not least, let's talk about these fully checkered Turkish walnut grip panels. These actually are made by T-Sauce, but they didn't come looking like this. And of course, T-Sauce had to make an appearance in here somewhere. Honestly, I love T-Sauce still, even having a pistol like this, I still love my T-Sauces. They make great pistols, they make great parts, and if I want GI parts like thumb safeties and grip safeties, or even fully checkered wood grip panels, they are my go-to. Now, when I got these from T-Sauce, they had some super dark stain applied to them from the factory that just didn't look good and totally covered up the natural wood grain, and of course they were press checkered and quite unattractively, I might add, so I had to soak them in acetone to bring that natural color back out. And then I went in and recut the checkering by hand. So you probably didn't notice about me, but I actually like to fool around with making pistol grips, and the thing I've finally gotten into lately is hand checkering grips. If you've never felt hand checkered grips with really sharp diamonds, and most people have not, because basically all checkering out there these days, even on super high-end, Sabati double rifles and shotguns, they're all press checkered, or maybe machine checkered if you're lucky. But even machine cut checkering has a tendency to just blow out the tips of the diamonds. The other thing is, if you find an older rifle or pistol with hand cut checkering, what you'll find is at this point, all the diamonds have been kind of worn smooth and rounded over. Basically, the difference between actual hand cut checkering and other checkering, especially press checkering, is just night and day. Hand checkered wood stocks grip as well as the roughest grips out there. Even about as well as these Kensite sharkskin grips that I really like, and I had on these pistols before I put on these grips. But unlike plastic, wood does a much better job at mitigating sweat, I find. I don't sweat as much, and the wood grain itself helps draw in or wick away some of that moisture. I also prefer the way that these fill the hand more than these. Plastic grips are usually pretty thin, and of course, wood just looks about 10,000% better than any of these plastic or G10 grips or what have you. And that's especially true with hand cut checkering, because the nice sharp flats, the diamonds bounce whatever light hits it. And you just really don't get that with the standard press checkered stuff out there, even if they coat the thing in a pimp shine varnish like they usually do. Now, I went one step further with these because I'm going to be using this gun a lot, and I want to keep those diamonds nice and sharp. So I actually went in and used a stabilizing resin called cactus juice to harden this walnut further. That process entails submerging the raw panels in the resin and then using a vacuum chamber to kind of draw the resin into every single pore of the wood grain. And then you bake it in an oven to cure the resin. So with these being a hardwood walnut plus the resin, they are basically about as hard as wood can get, and that checkering should last a good long time. But even when they eventually do wear down, the great thing about actual cut checkering is that I can always just go back in and touch up any diamonds that flatten out, because I have the tools for that now. You can't really do that with press checkering, for example, and press checkering, like I said, is just usually pretty smooth and not grippy in the first place. So yeah, hand checkered wood grips, in my opinion, I think they are the best out there if you can find them. I am probably going to set up a little Shopify or something at some point for these, but for now, if you're going to the national matches at Camp Perry, I will probably have a few of these sets I'll be letting go, but promise not to get sticker shock, because these two panels probably took about 12 hours of labor over multiple days. Now, of course, these were my first panels that I did, and as I get better, they will probably take less time. But the fact of the matter is, hand cut checkering will always be a labor-intensive process that will take hours and hours and hours, plus the cost of goods, and that's exactly why you really just don't see it anymore. Lastly, to finish the grips, I put a coat of raw linseed oil on these, which is my favorite finish for walnut. The stabilizing resin actually leaves behind enough surface roughness so that you can still put a finish on this wood, which is awesome. The cool thing about raw linseed oil is, over time, raw linseed oil, unlike boiled linseed oil, slightly darkens and turns to sort of an orangish amber color, which when you put it on walnut, it gives it that reddish brown color you can see on old GI, M1 Garands, and M1 carbines and such. So over time, these grips are just gonna look nicer and nicer with age. I'm just a little artistic when it comes to grips. Grips are obviously, again, one of the key places that we interface with the gun. So I'm very particular about what I like And in several instances, when it comes to pistols, like with my P210 and here with the 1911, the answer to the perfect grip solution was to make them myself. So before getting into the next portion of the video, I'd just like to take a quick second to talk about my channel's sponsor, Michael Scott Earl. Michael Scott Earl is a New York Times best-selling author who's written a wide range of novels. I personally have been reading, or rather listening to, his Star Justice series. I'm on the 3rd book now, and one of my favorite things about his books is that they are almost all available in audiobook format. The audiobooks are actually read by multiple voice actors rather than, plainly narrated by a single reader. If you click on the link in the description or the pinned comment, it'll take you to the 1st book in the Star Justice series, and at the time of this video's publishing is available for free in ebook format. So thank you to Michael Scott Earl for sponsoring the channel. So that's pretty much the build list. As you can see, what it ends up being is a very classically styled custom 1911 setup for CMP service pistol, or a national match hardball gun. Really, the lower part of this gun looks like you could place it anywhere between the 1940s and the present day. The upper half is a little bit more modern, especially with the lowered ejection port, the full-length guide rod, dovetailed front sight, and the buried Bomar. But still looks like something that could have been around in the late 80s through the 90s. Really, it looks like something that someone could have done to a much older USGI national match slide. Again, with the serrations and the markings, this is a pretty good copy of a USGI national match slide. A little bit of custom 1911 history. Like I mentioned, those national match slides were the first 1911 slides with slanted serrations, and they would later appear on the Colt Gold Cup national match, like I said earlier. As a result, those slanted serrations would actually become associated with match quality or accurized 1911s with good hardened slides. And so by the late 80s and 90s, when more manufacturers and custom shops started making their own slides and frames, rather than just modifying Colt or government issue parts, a lot of them started to incorporate these slanted serrations to give their guns more of that higher end look versus the standard vertical government serrations. Now, of course, like any custom 1911 made for Bullseye, the slide to frame fit on this is about as close as you can get without it being a one-piece 1911. You can see there's basically no play, and the slide to frame fit just feels like glass. The barrel is extremely hard fit. The bushing, again, is so well fit into the slide, I have to beat it out every single time with a hammer. You can see by the marks on the barrel as well that the bushing makes good contact all 360 degrees around the barrel. It's just a very nice slip fit there at the front side of the barrel. You can also see on the wear marks of the slide stop pin where the barrel feet are locking up nice and hard against the slide stop pin and not riding the link. All of this meticulous hand fitting, and out of a ransom rest, this pistol was able to group 1.3 inches at 50 yards with 185 grain Atlanta Arms jacketed hollow points. Other custom 1911 things about this pistol: the extractor has been properly relieved, polished, and tensioned. The barrel's been throated, the feeder amp's polished. There's a disconnector cut we put into the bottom of the slide so that the slide now rides smoothly over the disconnector rather than hitting that harsh 90-degree angle like on a standard gun. I'd say that plays a larger role in how smooth the gun feels when you rack the slide than just the slide to frame fit does alone. And of course, a total trigger job was done on pretty much every single moving component in the fire control group. That includes the trigger bow, the sear, the disconnector, the sear spring, even the little part that the hammer strut bears on in the mainspring housing was polished. Really, the only surface that wasn't touched were the hammer hooks, which come from cylinder and slide with a really high polish anyways. What that leaves us with is an extremely clean trigger with a medium to long roll, which is just how I like it. If you're unfamiliar, a roll trigger essentially has some movement in the trigger after it hits the wall. So with all 1911s, you have pre-travel, you hit the wall, and then on my trigger, it kind of rolls as that sear slips off the hammer hooks. All 1911s will have some amount of roll because that sear has to have an overlap with the hammer hooks, and then it has to slip off the hammer hooks. The larger that engagement surface is between the sear and the hammer hooks, the more roll you're going to have on that trigger. Now, roll for some people is synonymous with creep, but I intentionally like my triggers to have a decently long roll. I do not like crisp, glass rod brake triggers, so when we did the trigger, we left a large amount of sear engagement or overlap between the primary sear surface and the hammer hooks. Now, as far as weight goes, I've said this before in other videos, and I'll say it again here, but weight is less important than feel. But if you are curious, the weight on this trigger is a little bit over 4 pounds to comply with CMP service pistol rules with a minimum trigger weight of 4 pounds. But with how smooth everything is in this pistol's fire control group, and because of that really long roll, it feels a lot lighter than 4 pounds. Everyone I give this to, they say it feels like it's 2 pounds. That is one of the advantages that I find with a roll trigger. They tend to make heavier triggers feel lighter for whatever reason. I don't know if it's psychological or subconscious, but it feels lighter to me, even though it is 4 pounds. It's sort of like a double action revolver. If you put a 6-pound double action trigger in a revolver, it feels so light. And I think it has to do with that great big long roll on a double action. But a single action with a 6-pound trigger feels so heavy because there's usually very little travel. I mean, you're on that trigger, you're pulling, and it's not going. So I think a medium to long roll single action trigger kind of bridges the gap, leading to me perceiving the trigger as being lighter than it actually is. And of course, the only way to test the trigger weight of a trigger is with a set of weights. I made a set of weights out of some steel rod and washers, nothing crazy. Those little springy things that you pull on the trigger, they're just no good in my opinion. So what's been my experience with this pistol so far? Outstanding. It is an awesome feeling finally having a centerfire handgun that isn't handicapping me. And when I say that, I mean it, because I've gotten to the point in my shooting ability to where I can shoot better than the mechanical accuracy of most lock breech handguns. And that's not some crazy flex or crazy outlandish claim. Pretty much anyone with a master or high master classification in any of the traditional pistol sports can say the same thing, and we have the targets and the scores to prove it. But even before getting to that point, a less accurate pistol will inherently hold you back to some degree. If my best theoretical group with, say, a laser pistol is 3 inches at 50 yards, if you add 4 inches to that, which is pretty standard for a commercial pistol with no accurization done to it, your best average group can realistically only be about 7 inches consistently. Can you print groups smaller than that with that pistol? Of course you can, but you're only achieving that due to a degree of luck and statistical likelihood. The name of the game when it comes to traditional shooting sports is consistency, so we don't want to rely on luck. As a personal example, my best groups tend to be about 1.5 to 2.5 inches larger than the mechanical accuracy of the pistol that I'm shooting at 50 yards. So, for example, my Hammerly 208, my 22 pistol, it groups about 1.5 inches at 50 yards with CCI standard, and my best groups with that pistol and ammo combination are about 3.5 inches at 50 yards. The pistol I was shooting in the service pistol category before switching to this was my SIG P210, which I made a video about that you should definitely check out after this. And that pistol ended up being really only about a 3-inch gun at 50 yards mechanically. Consequently, my best groups with that pistol ended up only ever being about 5 inches, and my best numerical score at 50 yards was only ever about a 96, and my average being about a 90. So this pistol, again, ransom rested at 1.3 inches at 50 yards using Atlanta Arms jacketed hollow points. On my second competition slow fire target with this pistol, I smashed my slow fire record by 2 whole points and shot a 98 with 5 X's. And my average at 50 yards has also gone up by 2 whole points to 92 points. So just for reference, shooting a 97 or better at 50 yards would put you in range to break the record for the national trophy pistol match, and a 93 average in that match would set you up to win in pretty much any given year. Of course, that is provided that you can hold your ground at 25 yards for timed and rapid fire. At 25 yards, both my timed and rapid scores have also gone significantly up with this pistol, and I think that's largely due to the sights. I'll get on that more here in a second. In any case, my timed average went up 4 whole points from an average of 92 to 96, and my rapid average has gone up 5 points from an average of 90 to 95 since switching to this pistol. Now, one thing I did not realize about having a hard fit 1911 is how much softer the recoil impulse is. All of the energy that's robbed just trying to unlock this tightly fitted gun significantly reduces the sharpness of the recoil. And even though I'd shot like an Accuracy X in the past, it's just not something that I noticed or paid attention to until John Shu pointed it out to me. So with that said, I think most of my improvement at 25 yards is coming from the excellent trigger on this pistol and of course the hand loads that I've been shooting, which are a little softer than most 230 grain hardball loads, but definitely softer than the 9mm 124 grain load that I was shooting out of my P210. The P210 was also annoying in that I could never get the rear sight low enough for a true center hold, whereas with this pistol and how we machine the front sight, the rear sight has plenty of elevation adjustment left in it, and now I have a true center hold at 50 yards and at 25 yards. All this data was collected over a few matches I've shot with this pistol since February. I shot 2 centerfire 90-shot matches, 2 45 90-shot matches, and 1 service pistol excellence and competition match. I've got a big spreadsheet where I track my scores at matches, and that's also one of the cool things about Bullseye or any of the traditional shooting sports is that it's super easy to quantify your scores, track your performance, and track your progress. I am extremely pleased with how this pistol has performed so far, and I'm sure I will only get better with it as I shoot more 45, especially in rapid fire. Right now, my goal is to break 2600, which is to achieve a score of 2,600 in a 270 shot match, which is the aggregate of the 90 shot, 22, centerfire, and 45 matches. So my first match with this pistol, plus the Hammerly, I shot a 25.61. My second match I shot with this pistol, I shot a 25.89. So with that trajectory, I think I'll break 2,600 here fairly soon. I know I have the ability to do it. I just haven't been able to put the scores together. I've already gone through this process with the 22 where for months 2600 eluded me due to small administrative issues I was having or stupid mistakes I was making. John Shu then invited me out to his home to focus solely on training for a week. After that, I got home and my very next match, I smashed through my goal of breaking 2,600 and shot a 26.32. And then the very next month, I shot a 26.50. So I know I'm capable of shooting that type of score with this pistol. It's just about tying everything together. Some of the things I'm struggling with in this 1911 has been my hand loads, actually. Something about them is causing feeding issues every now and again, leading to several alibi strings, which cost you huge amount of points in Bullseye. An alibi string is basically where you get to reshoot 5 rounds in a timed or rapid fire string if you experience a malfunction, but you end up having to take the lowest scoring 10 shots on your target. You also only get 1 alibi per match, so if you have another stoppage or malfunction and you can't get all your rounds on target in the time limit, every saved round is a big fat 0. So with all the factory ammo I've shot in 500 so rounds of Atlanta Arms, Federal, Norma, S&B, a mix of jacketed hollow points, round nose, flat nose, brass case, aluminum case, I've had 0 problems with reliability from the very start with this pistol, and that's with minimal cleaning, which of course flies in the face of most people's perceptions of super tight hand-fit 1911s, especially guns made for Bullseye. People think they're unreliable for some reason. With my hand loads, however, which are 185 grain lead semi-wad cutters loaded on mixed brass, I've had a stoppage rate of about 1%. Mostly failures to feed and a couple failures to fire, no failures to extract or eject. In any case, that failure rate is pretty bad for a centerfire, but the last batch of ammo I loaded had a lower failure rate, so hopefully that's a sign that I'm getting better at the reloading aspect of this experience. Maybe I need to seat my bullet a little deeper or something like that. So in conclusion, I think once I've solved that issue I'm having with my hand loads, I'll have total confidence, and ultimately that's what you're getting with a pistol in this class. There are plenty of pistols out there that cost a fraction of what this pistol does, that perform to within about 95% of what this pistol can achieve. But where my headspace is at in wanting to win at Bullseye, I want to win at the sport, I need to have a pistol that I know will punch an X if I do my part. So in that aspect, I have total confidence in this pistol, especially after shooting that 98.5 in my first match. So once I dial in my hand loads at 25 yards, I'll have total gear confidence, and then all that's left is to focus on the sights and pull the trigger. If you watched all the way to this point, thank you for sticking around. I know this video probably won't be very popular because it's basically just me gushing over my new gun, but hopefully there were some pedagogical tidbits you may have picked up here and there in the video. If you like my videos, please consider directly supporting me by becoming a channel member. You can do that by clicking the join button next to my channel name. In any case, thank you all for watching and have a great day.